The low hum of an early motor carriage broke the silence of the countryside road. Villagers stopped. Some turned. Others simply stared, because machines like that did not pass through places like this. Not without reason. Old, rusted, and long untouched. Then it stopped. For a moment, no one moved. Then the door opened, and he stepped out. Tall, composed, unrecognizable from the boy who had once left this place with nothing. Now he returned as a man the world knew, a man whose name carried weight across England, a man who had built power with his own hands. But as his eyes lifted to the house beyond the gates, none of that seemed to matter, because this was home. Or at least, what remained of it. The gates creaked open slowly as the Duke stepped inside. 15 years. That was how long he had stayed away. 15 years since he walked out in anger, leaving behind the only person who ever truly stood by him, his mother. Now the house stood silent, empty, cold. No servants, no light, no life. Only dust and memories that refused to stay buried. He moved through the halls slowly, his footsteps echoing where laughter once lived. Nothing had changed, and yet everything felt wrong. Then he saw it, a letter, resting alone on a small table, untouched, waiting, his name written on it, in her handwriting. His breath caught, because the woman who wrote that letter had been dead for years. So how is it possible that a message from his mother was waiting for him in a house no one had entered? And what did she know that he didn't? Because what he was about to read would not only uncover the truth behind her final days, it would expose a betrayal that should never have been buried. But before we uncover what really happened, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And if you enjoy powerful stories of truth, betrayal, and emotional justice like this, make sure you subscribe and turn on your notifications, because the next story might stay with you even longer. Now let us return to the day everything was taken from him. Edric Haelwyn had never known hunger. At 14, his world was still untouched by the kind of hardship that changes a person. His days moved easily between lessons, long walks across the fields, and evenings spent in the quiet comfort of home. He spoke freely, laughed without caution, and carried no weight beyond the small expectations placed upon him. His father was a man others listened to without being told to. There was nothing harsh in him, nothing loud, yet his presence alone settled disputes before they began. When he spoke, it was measured. When he decided, it was fair. Edric had never once doubted that such a man could be anything but permanent. His mother moved differently. Where his father brought order, she brought warmth. She noticed what others overlooked, whether a servant had grown tired, whether a room felt colder than it should, whether her son needed guidance or simply silence. She never raised her voice, yet her words remained long after they were spoken. That night had been ordinary. The table was set as it always was, bread still warm from the oven, a simple stew, and wine poured without ceremony. His father had eaten without complaint, though quieter than usual. Edric had noticed it, but only in passing. There had been no sign that anything was wrong. His mother had asked if he was tired. He had answered that he was not. That was the last full conversation they shared as a family. By morning, the house had changed. His father did not wake. There was no struggle, no sound in the night, only stillness where life had been. The physician was called, though not quickly enough to matter. Words were spoken in low tones, explanations were given that did not explain anything. Edric stood at the doorway and watched as the truth settled around him without form. He did not understand death, he understood absence, and his father was gone. The days that followed did not allow for stillness. Grief did not have time to take its place before something else arrived.
Men came into the house without asking. Papers were carried in, voices lowered when he entered rooms. His mother stood where she was told, listened when she was addressed, and spoke only when necessary. It was during this confusion that his uncle appeared. Garrick Halewyn had always been present in the family, though never close. He smiled easily, spoke politely, and carried himself as though he belonged wherever he stood. Now he moved through the house as if it were already his. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He explained. Matters of inheritance, matters of legal standing, matters that had already been decided before they were spoken aloud. His mother listened. Edric watched. The house that had once been open began to close itself piece by piece. Doors were locked, rooms were emptied. Servants who had remained loyal for years were dismissed with little explanation. Some left quietly, others hesitated, looking toward her mother as though waiting for her to stop it. She did not. Not because she accepted it, but because she could not prevent it. There were moments when Edric expected her to protest, to speak, to argue, to refuse. She did none of those things. She stood with her back straight, her hands steady, and her voice calm when she was addressed. Dignity remained. Everything else was taken. The final order came without ceremony. They were to leave. Not at once, but soon enough to understand that their presence was no longer welcome. What could be carried was gathered, what could not left behind. The house that had once held every memory he knew became a place he was no longer permitted to belong to. Edric moved through the halls one last time without touching anything. There was nothing he could take that mattered. When they stepped outside, the air felt colder than it had before. The gates stood open, waiting. No one spoke as they walked toward them. No servant followed. No voice called them back. At the threshold, Edric turned. The house remained as it had always been, standing, unmoved, unchanged in its structure, but it no longer held what made it theirs. The gates closed behind them with a sound that did not echo, yet stayed. He did not ask where they would go. He did not ask what would happen next. For the first time, there was nothing left to assume, nothing left to rely on, only the understanding that what had been his life was gone.
The cottage stood at the far edge of the village, where the road narrowed and the land grew uneven. It had not been lived in for some time before they arrived, and it showed. The roof held, but only just. The door did not close fully unless pressed. The small window let in more cold than light. Edric noticed these things the first night. There was no fire prepared, no meal waiting, only what they had brought with them, which was not much. His mother moved through the space quietly, setting things in place as though order alone might make it feel like home. "It will do," she said. Edric nodded, but he knew it would not. The days that followed settled into something unfamiliar. There was no routine waiting for them, no structure to guide them. Each morning began with the same quiet question: what would they eat, and how would they find it? At first, they managed. A small loaf stretched across 2 days, a pot of thin broth made from what little could be gathered. His mother always served him first, always insisted she had already eaten. He believed her, until he began to notice. Her portion grew smaller, then disappeared. She moved more slowly in the mornings, rested longer in the afternoons. When he spoke, she smiled quickly, as though to reassure him before he could ask. The cold came without warning one evening. The wind found its way through the cracks in the walls, settling into the room and refusing to leave. Edric gathered what he could, old cloth, pieces of wood, anything that might block it, but it was never enough. That night they sat close to the small fire, saying little. He could hear it then. Not loud, not meant to be heard. A soft, unsteady breath from across the room. He turned slightly. His mother sat with her back to him, her shoulders still, her head lowered. For a moment he thought she was simply tired. Then he heard it again, a quiet sound, quickly stifled. He did not move. He did not speak. He understood. She was crying, and she did not want him to know.
Something inside him shifted then, not suddenly, but deeply. It was not anger, not yet. It was something heavier, a recognition that what they had lost was not returning on its own. The next morning she spoke as she always did. "We will manage," she said. Edric looked at her for a moment longer than usual. This time he did not answer. Days passed. The village had not changed, but the way it received them had. Where once there had been greetings, there were now brief nods. Conversations ended sooner. Doors closed more quickly. No one spoke against them, but no one stepped forward either. It was on one of these days that the man arrived. He did not come quietly. The sound of metal carried ahead of him, clear, sharp, deliberate. By the time Edric reached the center of the village, others had already gathered. The man stood beside a cart, arranging what he had brought. Swords. Not like the ones Edric had seen before. These were balanced, polished, shaped with a precision that drew attention without effort. Even those who knew nothing of such things could see the difference. The man himself said little. When he did, it was direct. A few words to those who approached, enough to explain what was needed, no more than necessary. A wealthy buyer arrived not long after. There was no negotiation, only inspection and agreement. The exchange was quick, efficient. Edric watched from a distance. He was not looking at the swords alone. He was watching the man, the way he moved, the way he worked, the way others treated him, not with familiarity, but with respect. There was something in it, something Edric recognized without fully understanding. Power, not taken, earned. For the first time since leaving the estate, he saw something that was not returning. He saw direction. That evening he spoke. "I will go with him," he said. His mother did not answer at once. "You are 15, she replied after a moment. "I am old enough." She turned slightly, her expression unreadable. "For what?" she asked. He held her gaze. "To return," he said. Silence followed, not empty, but full. She did not argue, she did not raise her voice, she did not try to hold him in place. Instead, she nodded once. That night, neither of them slept easily. There were things that could have been said, questions that could have been asked. None of them were. Morning came without ceremony. The road waited, as it always did. Edric stood at the doorway for a moment before stepping out. His mother remained where she was, her hands resting lightly at her sides. "I will come back for you," he said. She looked at him not as though she doubted him, but as though she already understood what it would cost. "I know," she replied. There were no embraces, no final instructions, only a quiet understanding between them. Edric turned and walked. He did not look back, because if he had, he might not have left at all. The first burn did not feel like pain at once. Edric had reached too quickly, his hand unsteady against the heated metal, and the contact was brief, but enough. The skin reacted before his mind did. By the time he pulled back, the damage had already been done. The man did not rush to him. "Again," he said. There was no anger in his voice, no concern either, only expectation. Edric looked at his hand, then at the unfinished blade resting before him. The forge burned steadily, its heat pressing into the room, thick and unrelenting. The air smelled of iron and smoke, of effort and failure repeated until it became something else. He reached forward again. The days that followed did not offer relief. Morning came early, and work began before the light had fully settled. His hands hardened, then split. His arms ached in ways he had not known before. Sleep came heavily, but never long enough. Mistakes were corrected without softness. Precision was demanded without explanation. There was no praise, only silence when something was done correctly, and correction when it was not. At first, Edric worked to keep up. Then he worked to understand, and slowly he began to see. The blade was not shaped by strength alone. It required patience, control, a steady hand guided by something deeper than effort. Each strike had purpose, each adjustment mattered. The smallest imbalance would carry through to the end. He learned to wait, to observe, to begin again without frustration. There were moments, in the quiet between tasks, when his thoughts returned to the cottage, to the dim light, to the sound of his mother's voice, steady even when everything around her was not. He remembered the way she had hidden her hunger, the way she had stood without complaint. Those memories did not weaken him. They steadied him. Each movement at the forge carried something of that weight. Each lesson was not only learned, it was held. Time passed without announcement. The boy who had arrived uncertain and untested no longer remained. In his place stood someone quieter, more deliberate. His body had changed, shaped by labor. His mind had sharpened, shaped by discipline. The man he worked under spoke more often now, not in praise, but in acknowledgement. "You understand," he said one evening, examining a finished blade. Edric did not answer. He did not need to. Years moved forward in this way. Work became mastery, though it was never named as such. Orders increased. Those who came seeking blades did so with intention, not curiosity. Nobles arrived without hesitation, their expectations high, their standards exacting. They were met, without excess, without display, only with the work itself. When the man fell ill, it was not spoken of openly. He continued as long as he could, his movements slower, his voice less frequent. Edric noticed. He said nothing. There came a morning when the forge did not open. The tools remained where they were. The fire was not lit. The silence carried its own understanding. What followed was handled without disorder. The affairs were set in place. The work passed on. There was no son to inherit it, only the one who had remained. Everything was left to Edric. The forge, the land, the name that had been built through years of discipline and precision. He accepted it without display. The work continued, and with it, something else grew. His name traveled further than he did, across towns, across counties, carried by those who had seen the quality of his craft and spoken of it without exaggeration. Requests came from places he had never visited, commissions from those whose influence reached far beyond the forge. Wealth followed, not in sudden abundance, but in steady accumulation. Land was acquired. A carriage replaced the long roads once walked on foot. Later, something newer, a motor carriage, rare and spoken of, became part of his movement, not as a symbol, but as a tool. He did not change his manner. He did not seek attention, but his presence was noted, respected, established. There came a moment, though not marked by any particular event, when he stood apart from the work and saw what had been built. Not just the forge, not just the name, but himself. The strength that had been shaped, the control that had been learned, the distance that had been traveled from the boy who had once stood outside a closed gate with nothing. He stood in the quiet of the workshop, the tools resting, the fire low. There was nothing left to prove here, nothing left to gain, only something undone. His gaze moved, not to the blades, not to the space around him, but somewhere further, to a place he had not seen in years, to a promise that had not been forgotten. He spoke then, not loudly, not to anyone present. "It is time to go home." The road leading back to the estate had not changed. The hedges still lined the narrow path, trimmed but no longer cared for with the same precision he remembered. The iron gates stood ahead, closed but not guarded, their black surface dulled by time. Edric slowed as his motor carriage came to a halt, the engine settling into silence. For a moment, he did not move. 15 years had passed, yet the place stood as though it had simply been waiting. He stepped out. The air carried a stillness that felt unfamiliar, not peaceful, empty. The kind of quiet that settles when something has long since left and nothing has come to replace it. He approached the gates and pushed them open himself. They resisted slightly, then gave way with a low sound that seemed louder than it should have been. No one came to meet him. No servant stepped forward. No voice called his name. He walked the path alone. The house rose before him, unchanged in structure, yet altered in presence. The windows were shut, the curtains drawn in places where light should have passed freely. The door stood closed, but not firmly, as though it had not been opened with purpose in some time. He entered without knocking. The air inside was colder, not in temperature alone, but in feeling. The rooms held no life, no movement, no trace of the warmth that had once filled them. His footsteps echoed faintly as he moved forward, each sound returning to him unanswered. "Mother?" The word left him before he could stop it. There was no reply. He moved further in, his pace steady, though something had begun to tighten beneath it. The silence did not shift. It remained, pressing into each space, settling deeper with every step he took. There were signs of presence, but not recent. A chair slightly moved, a folded cloth left upon a table, small things, untouched, as though they had been placed and then forgotten by time itself. He reached the main room, and stopped. A woman stood near the far wall, her posture uncertain, her hands clasped tightly before her. He did not recognize her at once. Age had changed her, but there was something familiar in her eyes. "She is not here," the woman said quietly. Edric did not move. "Where is she?" he asked. The question was steady, but beneath it something had already begun to break. The woman hesitated, then spoke. "She passed some months ago." The words did not land at once. They moved slowly, as though they did not belong to him. "No," he said. It was not denial, it was distance. "She waited," she continued, her voice softening, "every day, by the door. She believed you would return." Edric's gaze shifted to the door. It stood exactly as it had when he entered, closed, still. "She would sit there," the woman said, gesturing slightly, "from morning until the light faded. She did not say much, only that you had given your word." Silence followed, not empty, but full of everything that had not been said. The woman stepped forward slowly, holding something in her hands. She left this. Edric did not reach for it at once. Then, with care, he took it. The paper was worn at the edges but preserved, folded neatly, kept with intention. He opened it. His hands did not tremble, not yet. The writing was hers, steady, familiar. "My son, if this reaches you, then I have already gone where I cannot follow you back from. But you must know this before anything else. Your father did not die by chance." The words held his gaze. The room around him faded. "There were things I could not say while I lived under their watch. Your uncle's hand was not clean. I saw enough. I understood too late. You must not carry anger, but you must carry truth." His breath slowed. Each word settled deeper than the last. "If you have become the man I believed you would be, then you will know what must be done. Not for revenge, but for justice. What was taken must be named for what it was." There was no bitterness in the lines, only clarity, only trust. "I waited for you, not with sorrow, but with certainty. You gave me your word, and I kept faith in it until the end." The final line remained. "Do not grieve for what you could not change. Live in a way that honors what was right, not what was lost." The paper lowered slightly. Edric did not move. For a long moment, nothing shifted. Then, something gave way. Not outwardly, not with anger, but inwardly, completely. His knees met the ground without resistance. The letter remained in his hands. His head lowered. And for the first time since he had left that gate as a boy, he broke. Not in sound, not in fury, but in grief so deep it left no space for anything else. He had returned, stronger, prepared, ready to restore what had been taken. But the one person he had come back for was no longer there to receive him. The silence of the house settled around him once more, unchanged, unforgiving. And as he remained there, the weight of it became clear. "I came back, but not in time." The morning Edric Hailwyn went to see his uncle, there was no urgency in his steps. He did not arrive as a man seeking confrontation, nor as one driven by anger. The weight he carried had already settled into something quieter, something steadier. The letter remained with him, folded and kept close, not as a reminder of grief,
but as direction. Garrick Halewyn received him in a room that had once belonged to Edric's father. The arrangement had not changed much. The same desk, the same high-backed chair, the same narrow windows allowing in controlled light, but the presence within it had always been different. Garrick looked up as Edric entered. For a moment there was no recognition, only mild irritation at the interruption. "I was not informed of a visitor," he said, his tone dismissive. Edric stepped forward, his posture composed. "You were not meant to be," he replied. There was a pause. Garrick's eyes narrowed slightly as he studied him more closely. The boy he had known was no longer there. In his place stood a man shaped by years that had not been witnessed within these walls. Still, he smiled, a familiar, controlled expression. "And what business brings you here?" he asked. Edric did not answer at once. He reached into his coat and placed a set of documents upon the desk. The sound of paper against wood was quiet, yet it carried a finality that shifted the room. Garrett glanced down, then back up. "This is hardly the manner." "It is sufficient," Edric said. There was no force in his voice, only certainty. Garrick's hand moved to the papers. He unfolded them slowly, his expression unchanged at first. His eyes moved across the lines, scanning with the confidence of a man who believed himself beyond consequence. Then something altered. It was slight, barely visible, but present. "These claims are unfounded," he said, though the firmness had begun to thin. "They are documented," Edric replied. Another page was turned. More evidence, witness accounts, financial records, signatures placed where they should not have been, transactions made under authority that had never been his to hold. Garrick's gaze sharpened. "You think this is enough?" he asked. Edric met his eyes. "It is not what I think," he said. "It is what will be proven." There was no rise in tone, no challenge in posture, only the steady presence of a man who no longer needed to argue to be heard. The room seemed smaller now, not in size, but in control. Garrick leaned back slightly, his composure attempting to return. "You come here after years of absence and expect to undo what has long been settled?" "I came back," Edric answered, "to correct what was never right." Silence followed, the kind that does not invite response, only recognition. Garrick looked at him again, properly this time, not as an inconvenience, not as a memory, but as something he had not prepared for. "You have changed," he said. "Yes," Edric replied. Nothing more was needed. The matter did not end in that room. It moved beyond it, into the places where law held greater weight than position. The documents were presented, the evidence examined. What had once been concealed beneath authority was brought forward into clear view. The process was not loud. There was no spectacle, only the steady unfolding of truth. Fraud was named for what it was. Control taken without right was returned. Title, once held by assumption, was stripped by fact. Garrick Halewyn did not argue in the end. There are moments when denial no longer serves, when the structure built upon it cannot hold. He was removed, not with humiliation, but with finality. The law did not act in anger. It corrected. When Edric returned to the estate, the gates stood open. Not forced, not broken, opened. The house did not welcome him with warmth, but it no longer rejected him either. It waited, and this time he entered with purpose that extended beyond reclaiming what had been lost. The changes began quietly. Food was brought into the kitchens, not for display, but for use. The tables that had once served only a few were opened to more. Those who had struggled beyond the walls found their way through the gates without being turned away. No announcement was made, no claim of generosity, only action, steady, consistent. The land that had once been held in silence began to move again, not under control, but under care. And in each decision there was something guiding him that did not belong to him alone. Her voice, not as a memory, but as a presence, measured, certain, unyielding in what was right. Time passed, not marked by achievement, but by change that remained.
Edric did not rebuild the estate to its former image. He rebuilt its purpose. What had once been a place of structure became a place of meaning, and in that something was restored that had never been written into any record. He stood one evening at the edge of the grounds, the light fading slowly, the air carrying none of the emptiness it once had. There was no one beside him, yet he was not alone. He did not return to become powerful. He returned to become the man his mother had always believed he already was.